there is another little trick in this, which is that we have to do our doing, being in the ego mode, and be in our being in the God mode, alternatively. It's neither do, nor be, but do. Yes? So I am proposing a new lifestyle, alternate being and doing. Somehow I got into talking with mystics. And one day I even went to Ojai, California to hear the mystic Krishnamurti. I liked him a lot. But still, the paradoxes remained. Now, there are ways that these changes perpetuate in all of humanity that biologists have discovered, that quantum physics supports. We have to begin to use them. We have to begin to use them en masse. Morphogenetic fields are modified, and then society as a whole begin to inherit these morphogenetic fields to make their bodies and organs. And when that happens, then the whole society develops new capacity of developing brain circuit, of having brain circuits, which will correspond to the new behavior. So in this way, suppose we all become oriented towards positive emotions. Suppose we all start approaching problems with love. We need to get to the next step where we value intuitions much more to prepare the ground for supramental to come to us. Supramental will be represented in the physical. And they called it that heaven literally will be manifested on earth. Heaven will be manifested on earth. You are hearing me correctly. I was talking to a mystic friend, and this mystic friend, whose name is Joel Morwood, he started to ask some serious questions. And I was a little bit high-handed with him, because here I am, the physicist, and this fellow is just he was a filmmaker. And he had a mystical experience, so he called himself a mystic. Layperson, typically. So, we physicists look at lay people, usually, at least I did at that time. Now I have more respect. I was explaining to him the nature of the quantum measurement paradox. That look at this situation, when the brain looks, possibilities do convert themselves into actual events. And yet, the paradox is obvious. If consciousness is brain phenomenon, how could it do it? Joel asked me, is the consciousness prior to brain or brain prior to consciousness? I said, well, you were thinking of non-local consciousness. I know all about that. But Joel was not hearing me. He said that you have a scientific blinder, and you are sifting things through that scientific blinder, and you just don't see. Consciousness is prior to everything. Consciousness is without an object and without a subject. And somehow, this broke through. He used another phrase from Sufism, very emotionally. He became very emotional and said, there is nothing but God, Amit. There is nothing but God. That phrase, there is nothing but God, all of a sudden broke through my dense consciousness, and I recognized that why do we do science on the materialist basis and assume that matter is the ground of all being, which gives rise to this paradox? Why can't consciousness be the ground of all being? That which we call God, which is another name for consciousness, if that is the ground of all being, and if matter is made of consciousness, then consciousness can choose from these possibilities of its own the actual event without ever having any dualism. Question of dualism disappears just like fog in the morning sun. I was so profoundly happy. And later on, when I went outside, everybody was asleep in that house. And I look at the sky. And in the night sky, I could see a little bit of trace of the Milky Way. The idea for a quantum activist is to recognize that these material values are dominating the society. In order to change it, we have to ourselves recognize that we too have hidden materialist tendencies in the way that we approach things. We too often cater to negative emotions rather than positive. And therefore, we need to change first. We need to be inclined towards positive. If our own heart is open, if we are approaching things with love, other people will pick it up. These ideas have not really made much mark in spite of the fact that teachers like Jesus, teachers like Buddha have told us repeatedly. Jesus said clearly, love your enemy. Right? Jesus is not saying that you'll be satisfied if you can love your friend, that's enough. Jesus is not satisfied with that. Jesus is saying, love your enemy. But can we love our enemy today? We hesitate. Well, maybe, maybe Jesus was a little bit out of it when he said that. No, Jesus knew what he was doing. He knew that we are interconnected even with our enemy, and therefore we'll be killing ourselves if we kill our enemy. That's why love your enemy is the only way. But this sounds so lofty because we are in our mind. We are still evolving in our mind. And we are at a stage of mental evolution where we try to solve every problem by our rationality. And this is not enough. This is not enough. We have to change in such a way that the transformative power of quantum physics comes into our life. Non-locality of consciousness and discontinuity in creativity. This is quantum activism. We have to change in such a way that evolution is accelerated, not ignored. It is indeed very similar to what mystics tell us constantly. Start with yourself. Only if you change, the world can change eventually. We are just taking it a little bit further. Not only you start with yourself, but you always remember others. In the olden days, we were satisfied by having a model of spirituality where I change and I eventually go to heaven and I don't care about you. This will not do because you are also me. You and I are connected. If you can't go, I can't go either. This concept has existed in some traditions. In Buddhism, indeed, there is a concept of bodhisattva where a being becomes so evolved in love that the being literally says that, okay, if you don't go to heaven, I won't go. I'll just stay at the doorway. But still, even that is not enough. This is why the phrase "walk the talk" developed, very welcome word, welcome phrase in our culture. So let's walk our talk and make brain circuits of positive emotions. We just do it. We practice. If some of us could be good, do good, practice do regularly, be with God some of the time, be in ego some of the time, and let the dance generate creative acts of transformation. That if we do just a certain threshold, I think very quickly we can achieve the power of downward causation in unprecedented numbers. A threshold that will carry us towards making that fundamental step that these changes will take hold in all of humanity, just not in a few of us. But the few of us will start this. I invite you to be a quantum activist with this resolution, with this objective in mind. we can change ourselves and we can change the world simultaneously.